I understand that for most of the people that have any idea of what enlightenment is supposed to be, like for the ones who have heard of enlightenment in the first place, which is really very few, it's often conceived of as something vast, grand, mystical, extraordinary. And for many of those folks, frequently it's something that they consider to be totally beyond their grasp, even if it's something that they think they want, even if it's something that they think they're pointed towards. There's very few of them that think, that's definitely within my grasp. Mm. So it often presents to them as something that is powerfully and extraordinarily valuable, that they're afraid they're probably never going to reach. And there's a tremendous number of things about those kinds of thoughts that simply aren't, they're not accurate. Now, despite what I just said, there are some, when people go through that particular doorway and they have an awakening, they have an enlightenment experience, there are frankly ways in which that may be experienced that are so extraordinary as to be hard to articulate and hard to conceive. But there's a funny thing about it also, which is that it encapsulates the most mundane also. And so one could say, I experienced, metaphorically speaking, I experienced being catapulted into the universe, catapulted into the void. And they could also say the same thing by saying, I simply looked at a blade of grass and saw what it was for the first time. Those sound like very different things, but for the person going through that experience, they could seem identical. Enlightenment literally means to turn the lights on, to light up. It's a metaphor for when the light turns on, one can see. And all of a sudden, in this scenario, in this enlightenment scenario, enlightenment literally means I'm seeing clearly. That's all. It sees what's vast clearly, but also sees the teacup on the table clearly. The teacup on the table is a teacup on the table. And there's equally as much enlightenment in that as there is in some vast, expansive experience. So again, when they go through that doorway, there may be some aspects of it that are extraordinary to them, but there's absolutely no getting around the fact that it encompasses everything, including the very most mundane, like putting their shoes on and putting gas in their car and petting their dog and sending their kid to school and doing the things that they've done over and over 1,000 times or more.
So where are you? Okay. Because this is a question that someone would have. If someone says, they're awakened or enlightened or some such thing,
Right.
Where does that put you throughout your day? Because you do these things like anyone else. You go here, you go there.
Yeah.
But what's different?
What's different? What's different is that the sense of an individuated personal self is recognized as permanently absent, and that is it doesn't mean I don't operate, though, in a capacity that's normal and ordinary. It does mean that a lot of the burdens that we tend to attach to that personal self don't seem as heavy. St. Francis said it beautifully when he said, "You wear the ego as a light garment," which is a way of saying, yes, you're participating in the world like anyone does, because here you are in this world. At least you seem to be. And so you go about in it, and you put your pants on one leg at a time, and all the other things.
Is there or does there need to be an experience beyond this world for one to reach this goal of enlightenment?
It's more of an experience of seeing that what you thought was true about yourself and about this world is not true.
And that can be done.
It's not that you need to see something beyond this world so much. It's that the ideas and the limitations that one has about themselves and about this world are seen through.
So an element of illusion regarding this world is gone.
Yes, which is, again, akin to that notion of the lights turn on and you saw clearly. And when you see something that isn't true, and you know that it's not true, it's impossible to believe in it. So it tends to just fade away.
And this is the experience we're all having. Gradually these illusions are diminishing for people.
Yes, that's one way of saying it, yeah. I mean, one could say that what is the spiritual journey, which is another way of saying what is the human journey? We learn to see clearly. Sometimes it takes a long time. At least it seems to. Here's one of the funny things about trying to talk about enlightenment and who's enlightened and who's not and that sort of thing. So one of the things that is very frequently expressed in these about these things is that one of the often noted hallmarks of awakening is recognizing that this sense of an individuated self turned out not to be true. And this is where language gets tricky when it comes to talking about being enlightened. Because if I've just said, out of one side of my mouth, I as an individuated self don't exist, that's a false understanding of how this is actually set up. And then I turn around and I say, oh, also, I'm enlightened. That's obviously a contradiction. It is a contradiction. One of the misconceptions that people often have is that they become enlightened. It's not exactly the way it generally goes. What they discover is that the individuated self they thought they were isn't true. It doesn't exist in the way they thought. And it's when they see through that they have an experience that we commonly call awakening or enlightenment. Well, who just got enlightened? Nobody. So who is enlightened? Well, sort of nobody. It sounds and feels absurd to say, I'm enlightened. That doesn't at all resonate as a frankly correct description. People often also attach to that, just the way that, in the same way that they attach enlightenment as they attach to enlightenment the notion that it's a grand personal achievement, that it then accrues to them a vast array of marvelous magical things that makes them, that individual self, more awesome. And it's not hard to recognize that if you follow that to its sort of logical conclusion, that there couldn't be anything more of a wild egoic aggrandizement than that. What could lock a sense of self into place more than that? It's hard to come up with anything. And so again, we return to the truth of it, which is that enlightenment or awakening seems to be an event that happens within consciousness, but does it actually happen to an individual self? No, it's the seeing through that individual self doesn't have the reality that one thought it did. And when that sense of personal self goes, it begins very, very naturally to seem like, well, if this isn't true, if this isn't a separate self, then it isn't separate. And so all of a sudden in floods this experience of whatever this is seems to be kind of connected to everything. So then we get into these non-dual phrases like, I am you, you are me. It was all one. It was connected to everything. Everything's connected. And that seems sort of automatically and naturally apparent in these instances when that sense of self disappears. Sometimes it disappears momentarily. People often experience that. Sometimes it disappears in a seemingly permanently abiding way. That's usually what we term awakening. But to the one that has gone through that particular doorway, it's funny how it could not move the needle much in a way, because if there's no one there to get excited about it, it may be sort of mind-blowing, but it still doesn't engender that feeling of, wow, I made it. Because that I isn't there to experience that. And so one of its hallmarks often is that it's very, very quiet and very calm. And there really isn't any aggrandizement to it at all. And in that way it could seem very small. Just peaceful. And lovely. And a place from which it seems very natural to be very loving and to be very forgiving. Because if it really is all connected, then it's very natural to be forgiving and very loving and very gentle and things like that. And those aren't things that are very loud or raucous. They don't really wave their own flag too much. So it could also just seem quiet. And completely change the perspective that is experienced in the world. And that's about it.